Well, it's nice to be back in the podcasting seat after a week off.
Yeah, has it been that long?
It feels like a long time, doesn't it? I don't know. I feel like we've been away for a while.
Yeah, I guess you get into a routine and you break it up and you lose track of what's happening.
Yeah, we had the usual 6 recordings this week, but it took me a long time to get through them for some reason. I don't know what happened. Maybe I knew that week off was coming.
Where are we? Let's see. Oh, yeah, this is episode 215.
Wow.
You're listening to Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind. I'm your co-host, Russ.
I'm your co-host, Mike.
And, well, we've got a lot of bad news, good news, and gratitudes to get through here. I guess let's just get through the bad news right away. So let me get over to the piano here. Since we took a little time off, we've lost a few members of the music community worldwide. Let's start with classical, Mike.
I'm going to start with classical. Okay, so the Danish composer Per Nergård died on May 28th, 2025 at the age of 92.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, he was in a Copenhagen senior home at the time. I guess he had retired. He was getting up there. He was a pretty important figure in the 20th century. And one of the things he's really notable for is his use of something he calls the infinity series, which is this compositional technique that's inspired by mathematical sequences with fractal geometry. And it sounds really kind of complicated. And, I don't want to hear that. But it actually produces really pretty sounds. Kind of like if you think of the branches of a tree. Yeah, you have the branch and then you have little branches on that. And you'll get that sort of effect from this kind of technique. Now, he doesn't use it in every work. I've been listening to his symphonies recently, and they're all different. They don't all use that. He has 8 symphonies that he completed, and they're all worth hearing. They start out sounding a bit like Sibelius, and by the end, of course, he's his own man, and pretty good stuff. He also composed film scores, including the score for Babette's Feast. Do you remember that movie?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was him. But if you know that score, you might want to look into his more serious music, too, because he left behind quite a bit. One of his teachers was Van Holmboe, one of our favorite composers.
Yeah, one of our favorites.
Who we never talked about on the podcast, I don't think, but we will.
Keep going back to all those old recordings that you shared with me 20-some years ago.
Oh, they're so fantastic. Yeah. The symphonies. All right, so rest in peace, Per Nergård. Okay, one more. I guess you could call this a classical death. The guy who composed the music for The Simpsons, Alf Clausen, died also on May 29th. He was 84 years old, and he was from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I should mention, he did not compose the opening theme of The Simpsons. That famously is a composition by Danny Elfman,
right? Sort
of imitating the old Bugs Bunny cartoons. But he did all the music that was in The Simpsons episodes up until the year 2011. That's 600 episodes of The Simpsons that he composed for. And he also composed for Moonlighting, Alf, and Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which is now in the news because it takes place on June 5th, and that just passed. So,
all right.
Rest in peace, Alf Clausen.
Over in the jazz world, we lost drumming great Al Foster, born Aloysius Tyrone Foster in 1943. He passed away on May 28th at 82 years old. He played with Miles Davis, Joe Henderson, McCoy Tyner, Tommy Flanagan, and Kenny Barron, among many others. And he made his debut on one of my favorite recordings of all time, Blue Mitchell's The Thing to Do in 1964. So he started out at age 20. He went on to record more with Blue Mitchell as well, also on other albums that I like, Down With It and Heads Up. All of those are on Blue Note. And no doubt if you like that period of post-bop playing, you've heard his drumming often with a lot of jazz greats. So rest in peace, Al Foster.
Well, now I'm feeling really sad. You think you can cheer me up over there?
Let's cheer you up. We've got to give out a bunch of thank yous. So, first of all, thanks to saxophonist Jordan Vandermeert for sharing our previous regular episode from 2 weeks ago, in which we featured his new recording, Survival of the Fittest, on Origin Records. We really liked that one a lot, so check that out if you haven't heard it. Also, this just in, right before we started recording, we got a share from the Landius Trio, and they shared our episode from one before that, I think it was, Sacred Trinity and Swinging Trio, and we featured their piano trio recording, Resilience. So if you haven't heard that, that's kind of an interesting recording with melodica and some other interesting combinations of sounds on there. So check that out as well. Also, thanks to Joe Brent at Agiropa Records for setting up and also sharing our interview with saxophone great Lenny Pickett and drummer John Hadfield.
Yeah, it was really fun to talk to those guys.
It was interesting.
They were interesting. They had a lot of interesting things to say.
Yeah, we released that last Tuesday in anticipation of the Friday, June 6th release of their new duo recording on Agiropa, Heard by Others Too. So if you haven't heard that interview yet, go check that out. We learned a thing or two about electronic music, old and new, and it was a lot of fun. I've been listening to Lenny Pickett since high school, and so that was another great chance afforded to us through doing adult music.
Right.
Also want to let you know about a new podcast. It's called Canadian Songbook, a documentary-style podcast that explores the rich musical fabric of Canada through personal stories, meaningful conversations, and a deep dive into the ways music shapes identity and community. Some guests will include Jim Cregan of Bare Naked Ladies,
wow,
Grammy-winning baritone Elliot Madore, and jazz musicians like Mike Murley. The first 2 episodes will be released next Wednesday, June 11th, and the remaining episodes will be released the second Wednesday of every month. The first season will have 6 episodes. This is hosted by Ernesto Cervini. I guess his name would be in Italian, but I think Americans tend to make that C.
Right?
Cervini, right?
Yeah.
Or how do they say it in Brooklyn?
Cervini. Cervini.
Ernesto's the drummer for the Carn Davidson 9, a great Canadian nonet. We talked about their album Reverence from back in November in episode 189, Numbers on the Water. And Ernesto also does promotion and publicity for Toronto-based artists, and now he's going to have this podcast going. So all of our friends up in the Canadian North, check that out. And people from anywhere else. There's a lot of good music that comes out of Canada.
I'm losing my Brooklyn accent. I got to watch Saturday Night Fever a few more times.
We were talking about this week how Bare Naked Ladies was such a great name for a band, especially when it was a bunch of dudes.
Yeah, I remember them too, yeah.
And then I just happened to remember one of my other favorite names, the Crash Test Dummies. And it turns out they were Canadian too.
Yeah, Canadians come up with good band names. I'll tell you what Canadians don't do is listen to our podcast. Maybe they'll start listening to it now. We get a lot of American listeners, but almost no Canadian ones. There are a few, but
yeah.
A shout out to our very few Canadian listeners. You're special to us because you're in a very small select group.
All right, and finally, before we move into this week's episode, I want to send out a very special thanks to Mrs. Russ this week, Mike.
Oh, wow. Does she listen to the podcast?
Well, she hears it going on in the background sometimes, and she hears all the music. Oh. But we celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary this week.
That's a lot, man. Congratulations. I keep forgetting I'm this old. You know, that's the thing. 30 years, man. Congratulations.
So Mrs. Russ has always supported me in all the things I do, and she supports our podcast. Well, I spend every Sunday night with my boyfriend Mike here.
Oh, boy. Is that what she says?
Recording about music sometimes, you know.
Oh, boy. The jealous wife.
She's always supporting what we do as well, so I want to recognize all of that support effort she's given me over the years.
Yep. Can't have friends when you're married. Not allowed.
No, she's not like that, Mike.
Okay.
Oh, and I should take this opportunity just to mention that although I'm happily settled in with Mrs. Russ, Mike is still eligible in the bachelor category, ladies, so...
Yeah, but you know, I'm about to turn 60, and I'm just not looking, so you're going to have to come and find me. That's all I'm saying.
Offers being accepted. Our email address is coming up. Just sit tight.
Yeah, all the ladies, all the women listening to this podcast, right? I think we're 95% men listening to us.
You never know.
Yeah.
There might even be some Canadian ladies out there.
Yeah, who knows? They're out there, but they're not listening to our podcast.
Anyway, in the episode description, you'll find links to Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music for all of the recordings that we're going to discuss. And at the top of the description, there's a link to the full episode playlist. That's all the music in one place on Deezer, CD quality streaming music from France. And if you can't see the full description or the recording list and links are hard to follow or access on whatever app you're listening to us on, you can always come over and check us out on our host site. That's Podbean, PODBEAN.com. Everything is easy to follow there. If you enjoy the podcast, please follow or subscribe. Tell a music-loving friend as well. That helps us grow our audience. And if you take a moment to give us a ranking or write a short review, that helps us get listed in the music category recommendations on the podcast services. And that's another way we can grow our audience. Come over and follow us on our Facebook page as well to get extra info and more new releases throughout the week. You can see our interaction with the artists. Leave a message or comment there as well. Check us out on X. We're over there on that platform formerly known as Twitter. You can find us at Adult Music Pod, and I post links to the new episodes there as well. And if you'd like to contact us directly with any comments or questions, our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, at gmail.com. We'll be playing music samples as we go through our discussions, and this is our fair use disclaimer. Music sample clips are for commentary and educational purposes. We recommend that listeners listen to the complete recordings, all of which are available on streaming services in the links provided. And we also suggest that if you enjoy the music, you consider purchasing the CDs or high-quality downloads to support the artists. All that said, we're ready to jump into some music. So what's on the classical menu tonight, Mike?
Okay, so I went back in time a bit to the Renaissance era here. And in fact, not even the Renaissance, maybe even you could call this medieval. But it's early Renaissance,
right,
or, maybe late medieval. I'm not really sure. I think it's early Renaissance. But the album is called Ni Dufay, ni Binchois, the works of Johannes Pullois. All right, now Dufay and Binchois are pretty famous early Renaissance French composers. And Johannes Pullois, I've never heard of before. So this is a new name for me. And this is by the Sollazzo Ensemble. I have a few of their recordings from the past. I've always kind of liked their sound, and this album is no different. They have like this really sort of unique sound when they sing. It doesn't really blend like a lot of these Renaissance era groups do. The voices are very individual, so it's almost like you have a bunch of soloists sort of like, it's almost like they sound like a period instrument ensemble, only their voices. You'll hear what I mean soon. This is on the Passacaille label, released on April 11th, so that was a long time ago. Now, the reason why it took so long to get this is I've been trying to contact the Passacaille label, and it took them forever to get back to us, and they finally did, and once they sent us the booklet, I'm like, okay, we have to do this now. Anyway, Johannes Pullois' music has received relatively little attention from scholars and performers, and Sollazzo Ensemble aimed to correct that, and this is what I love about these sorts of ensembles, just digging up all this unknown music and putting it out there, and it's all really good, as it turns out. Pullois' life appears to have been uneventful, and I just want to say, lucky him. And now that I'm pushing 60, I think an uneventful life is really welcome. I hope that the rest of my life is uneventful. Anyway, and his surviving output comprises fewer than 24 compositions. That's really not a lot. His work does have historical significance, however, as well as superior artistic qualities. He was Belgian, or what you would have then called Flemish, and he made his way to Rome. He was a singer at the Papal Chapel. He served under 4 popes for a period of 21 years. Man, the popes came and went in those years.
I guess.
Yeah, and after this, he returned to Antwerp, where he became a residential canon at the Church of Our Lady. Okay, we have a bunch of compositions by him. It's a bit of a variety, and the first one is called Flors de Spina. It's Pullois' only full-fledged motet, and it's in 4 voices. The text recounts the pregnancy of the Virgin and the birth of Christ, which makes it both a Marian and a Christmas motet. It starts with droning viols, a sound that I really love, and I like the complete lack of vibrato on them. This is really that period instrument technique. Vibrato, it is believed, came later. The voices have a soft attack to them, and the tone is cushioned around the edges, and that's what I love about the Sollazzo Ensemble. This is why they sound unique. The voices are different enough that they don't completely blend into a seamless whole, and that makes this sound appealing to me, just like the early period instrument recordings. Let's hear an example of this and what this album sounds like. Those solos are coming out. You can hear the individual timbres of those voices. It's really great. There's a kind of intimacy to the sound, too, just because there are only, I think, 4 voices singing. There's 1 voice per part. And that makes this appealing to me too.
Yeah, the intersecting lines are really interesting there.
Yeah, that too. I also enjoyed the gentle, unobtrusive accompaniment from the viols and plucked string instruments. Having those plucked instruments in there really adds a lot of variety to the sound. The instrumentation is a viola d'arco, a salterio, or what we in English would call a psaltery, and a 6-course lute. Beginning at the 2-minute and 40-second mark, there's a gorgeous section where the instrumentation drops out and the voices are just suspended in air, holding their harmonies. It's an intriguing start to the album. Track 2, Pour toute fleur, a 3-part rondeau. It has pretty instrumentation with the psalteries sounding harp-like and the lute played muted. Now, I know people are going to complain. I just said mute, so why don't I say lute? Well, I think lute sounds pretentious, so I just say lute. You'll have
don't
to
want to do
deal
that,
with it.
no.
Yeah, it's my American thing. Okay, I know the British will say lute, but I like to be low class, I guess. Okay, there you go. So anyway, the lute is muted so that it and the viola d'amore play pizzicato. I should mention the instrumentalists are Franziska Fleischander on the salterio, Ori Hamelin on the lute, and Filipa Meneses on one viola d'arco, and the ensemble director Anna Danilevskaya on the other. The vocals come in halfway through at the 1-minute mark, but let's sample the instrumental part here. Really beautiful. The vocals again have all an appealing individuality to their individual tones. Track 3, Globus Igneus, pour prison, okay? This is a contrafact built by the Sollazzo Ensemble with historical materials. The original song is Pullois' Pour prison, or for prison, I guess, a song that has attracted the attention of scholars because at the phrase Ne veut plus mon cœur oublier, he literally cites the corresponding musical phrase from the chanson of the same name by his famous senior contemporary, Gilles Binchois. This track starts with another long and very appealing instrumental. Vocals are in by the 55-second mark, and the track has long instrumental interludes that only add to the character of the individual works. There's a light liveliness to the performance. It doesn't quite bounce rhythmically, but it's got an uplifting beat, and the singing gets bolder by the end. So it's a contrafact because they put different words to Pullois' original composition. Track 4, Hey, n'est-ce pas grand desplaisir? This is a rondeau, a style of French chanson, and it starts with staggered entrances for the voices. The vocals, in fact, enter without instruments, which join in gradually along with the vocalists. This is a good chance to hear the individual timbres of these singers, so let's hear a bit of this. I'm actually going to start this about 30 seconds in. So this isn't really a flowing song, and because of that, it kind of has a bit of a comic quality to it. The vocals come across as forward and dramatically intrusive, serving the text in this way. There's more a cappella from around the 2-minute mark, and this ensemble allows the vocals to float above the level of the ears as though they're on their way to somewhere. Track 5, Quelque Langage, another rondeau. It is preserved with its complete text. Though this has a lugubrious start, the instrumentation is so light that the viola d'amore's double-stopped tones don't come across as brooding. On this track, we hear a solo male vocalist in the tenor range with a boyish, appealingly light tone. The booklet doesn't specify whether it's tenor Jonathan Alvarado or Lior Leibovici. Whoever it is, he sings lightly, and this really drew me in. There's a bass viol in there that's sort of playing a contrapuntal line. It's got a vocal quality to it, so it almost sounds like he's duetting with it in a way. I really like that effect. Track 6, So Lang Zo Meer, a Dutch rondeau. Pullois is one of the earliest known composers from whom polyphonic songs with Dutch texts are preserved. Only the refrain has survived to this one. This track continues on from the last one without a pause, as though this track were the refrain for the last. But the change is a bit jarring despite the smoothness of approach, probably because suddenly all of the voices are in. It's certainly fuller sounding and more florid. And that's actually the way the track ends. Track 7, De Madame, a 3-part rondeau. The light-sounding psaltery is back. I really love this sound, so let's hear it again. And in the right channel, you could hear the lutes coming in to accompany. Really pretty. This is a long intro, and one of the tenors sings solo, and I'm going to guess it's Alvarado again. The voice has a suaveness that I associate with Latin vocalists. He remains the solo voice throughout. Track 8, La Bonté du Saint-Esprit. Pullois' only ballade, probably written in praise of an unnamed pope or possibly for the coronation of one of his employers, given that its text refers to a wise and learned person whose soul is so enlightened by virtue and acquired knowledge. Boy, my employer never says that about me, I can tell you that. It serves as the centerpiece of the album, and an attractive centerpiece it is, sung glowingly with sensitivity by the ensemble. The rhythm is slow and stately, and the softness of the attack of the psaltery, which is a hammered instrument, and the lute, which is plucked, give it a gentle tone. It's sung by a female vocalist, probably the mezzo-soprano Sofia Faltas. It's a haunting, spare-sounding voice in this vibratoless approach, and I mentioned all vocalists have appealing individual tones. Let's isolate this one. At the 2-minute mark, there's a pause, and all voices come in polyphony after that, still with a gentle attack, but thickening the overall texture. At around the 3-minute mark, there's an appealing melisma on the vowel E. I always like that sound in a melisma. Sounds great. Faltas is back solo in the 3rd minute after this middle section. Male voices subtly re-enter around the 3-minute and 50-second mark, humming in accompaniment here, and we hear one more verse of polyphony toward the end, and this leads the track to its final resolution. Track 9, C'est un bien beau. Again, hard to say who the vocalist is here. The tone is more veiled, but it sounds like a mezzo-soprano, so possibly Sofia Faltas again. The soprano is Karine Tini on the album, and I just want to make sure I credit her as well. We will hear her later. The track is softly and touchingly performed. Listen, is this the same voice as the previous track? I can't tell. I really wish the booklet notes had told us, but it was hard enough to get in touch with Passacaille that I didn't even want to try again. Anyway, here we go. It sort of ends on that high sort of note. There's a sort of resolution there that's not really a resolution. Track 10, Mon cœur pleure, and this is a rondo, a contrafact on Les Larmes. It is textless in its source, but has a text applied to it in the booklet. It's brief at 1 minute and 21 seconds, and features 2 viola d'amores on the melody throughout. The text in the booklet isn't sung, so this is an instrumental track. I'll let you sample it on your own. Track 11, Op Ihnen Tid. I don't know how to pronounce Dutch. You'll have to do that for me, Dutch listeners. It's a Dutch rondo, and where again only the refrain has survived. The psaltery is up front here, along with the 2 viola d'amore, and this time we hear the Dutch text sung by one of the tenors. I'm going to guess this is Lior Lebovici. It sounds different to me. And soprano Karine Tini and mezzo-soprano Sofia Faltas come in to harmonize for the second verse. Let's sample the tenor, who I think is Lebovici. Hear the 2 female vocalists in accompanying there. Track 12, Ragione unice genito, puisque fortune. This is a contrafact in which a French chanson's music was retained, but the original secular French text, puisque fortune, was replaced with a new religious Latin text, Ragione unice genito. This was very common practice at the time. You had a good song, you put a religious text to it so people would connect with it in church. Try to imagine that happening today. You go to church and you hear Hey Jude, the melody to Hey Jude sung to some religious text. Actually, it's been done. Cat Stevens' song Morning Has Broken, I remember hearing in church as like a religious text, like Christ Be Beside Me.
He's the artist formerly known as Cat Stevens, right?
Oh, he's got a different name now. Do you know what it is? I forgot.
Yusuf Islam.
Yeah, Yusuf Islam, but he was known as Cat Stevens back in the day.
When we grew up, yeah.
Or when that song came out. The opening features the solo salterio, or psaltery, and what a pretty instrument it is. I really can't get enough of listening to this. I could use a whole album of sultry music. I don't know, it might get boring fast, but I really like the sound the instrument makes. Let's listen. And here I am going out as soon as the vocal comes in, which is really the main part. I just wanted to hear that psaltery intro. The instrument is used judiciously on the album, so it never gets boring here. The track gets more attractive when Karine Tini and Sofia Faltas sing the melody in unison. Track 13, Victime Pascali. This is an incomplete three-voice setting of the Easter sequence Victime Pascali Laudes. Here, Pullois followed the example of Binchois' contemporary Guillaume Dufay in composing relatively simple chant-based liturgical music. The opening features brooding low viola d'amore and both tenors singing in unison, so I can name them here, Jonathan Alvarado and Lior Lebovici. Let's hear them. They sing sensitively, and then soprano Karine Tini is in for a solo line over a droning bass. The spareness of the work makes it attractive. Track 14, Gloria. This exists as a single movement, which was a common practice at the time, to have a single part of the ordinary of the church mass appear by itself. This Gloria is canonic. It's a four-voice composition. Karine Tini, I'll guess, opens the work. The work then starts positively, dancing in its rhythmically active vocalization. A real surprise after the previous track, and a nice contrast. We actually haven't heard Karine Tini solo yet, so I'm going to sample her here. Those just voices like ponging around everywhere. It sounds fantastic. It's a really joyous piece. And we end with track 15, Amen. And this is a contrafact on a French song called Je ne puis, or I Cannot. The Sollazzo Ensemble created this contrafact for the recording. It's a pretty brief track and features melismatic unison singing. And we get to hear the psaltery here one last time too. You should hear that on your own. This is an album of music from the medieval or early Renaissance period, and it's very attractively presented by the Sollazzo Ensemble, with their soft-edged vocals and distinctive timbres in the individual voices. It's the sound of the ensemble and their whole modest approach that makes this album so attractive. There's a fairly large variety of styles on the recording, making each track a bit of a surprise as to the approach. And the program is well suited to exposing the contrast in Pullois' various compositions. You really couldn't ask for a better introduction to the music of Johannes Pullois. You could probably get a brighter approach, perhaps, but I feel Sollazzo Ensemble's whole sound is ideally suited to this music. I do wish the booklet writer would do his job and indicate which vocalists we're hearing on each track when they get a solo. It would make things easier for the listener, and really, if you hear an appealing voice, you can kind of follow their career after that. It just makes the album more enjoyable.
I enjoyed the variety of material here, an interesting mix of chanson, religious pieces, and Dutch songs, all with very different characteristics. The style of the vocal line writing and the staggering of the lines that enter was also interestingly varied, and I enjoyed the balance of male and female voices set out through the program by the Sollazzo Ensemble, as well as the interesting instrumentation. Unusual resolutions and cadences caught my ear throughout, and as I was going along, track 13 was so enchanting, I went back and repeated it right away. That one really caught my ear. I don't usually do that, go right back and repeat a track, but I did, even though it was near the ending here. So, yeah, I found this very enjoyable.
Yeah, I'm going to have to pick this one up, I think, because I do have an older Sollazzo Ensemble album. I can't remember which one it is, though. Anyway, the second classical album of the night is called Vienna Mandolin Stories. And this is by Alon Sariel on the mandolin with the Kölner Akademie and Michael Alexander Willens as conductor. It was released on the Pentatone label on May 9th. Now, the mandolin became popular in Vienna in the 1780s, just when it was declining in popularity everywhere else. They got it a little later. We kind of identify the mandolin as being Italian. It's kind of got this sort of, Italian quality to it. We associate Italian music with it. The recording uses two types of mandolin. In fact, the Neapolitan type, with 4 courses of strings over a movable bridge, tuned like a violin. I'd really like to get a close-up look at one of those, which was completely ignored in Vienna when it was popular elsewhere. And the Milanese type, tuned in fourths with 6 courses tied to a fixed bridge, which is the instrument that the Viennese preferred. Probably because the Austrian Empire held vast territories in northern Italy, while Naples was politically closer to French influence. The first work we're going to hear on track 1 is by Mozart, Andante for flute and orchestra, Kochel 315, and this was arranged by Alon Sariel for mandolin and orchestra here. The orchestra plays quietly and in a measured way, and that's fine, because the mandolin is a pretty quiet instrument. The tempo here is on the slow side, which leads to precise articulation from the mandolin, and lots of space for its tone to breathe in. The recording itself is sensitive, the gentle pizzicati from the orchestra registering subtly, and the mandolin sounding quiet, yet very much the center of attention. Let's hear the opening. And man, what a charmer Sariel is on this instrument. It just comes in sounding really gentle and appealing. Due to the mandolin's sound, the work has to be played delicately, and the approach works extremely well. The work also has a cadenza beginning at around the 4-minute and 20-second mark. It's not athletically taken at all, but is made to show off the instrument's tone. Sariel has exquisite musical taste, and he shows it here. He does get in some virtuosity toward the end, but never at the expense of the instrument's tone. Tracks 2 through 3, Ernest Kramer, who lived 1795 to 1837, Larghetto and Rondo for mandolin and orchestra. The booklet notes are kind of vague on Kramer's activities, so I asked AI, and Grok tells me that Kramer was Austrian, of German descent, renowned for his virtuosity on the Zaccan, a duct flute popular in the early 19th century, as well as his skills as an oboist. He wrote mostly for the Zaccan, and it's questionable, apparently, whether Kramer wrote any of the mandolin works attributed to him. So, we could have an imposter here on this album. The booklet notes say these two movements were most likely original compositions by Kramer, so we're going to have to go with that. We really don't know. These could be by somebody else entirely. Anyway, it doesn't matter because we really just want to hear the music. The second track is Larghetto, and it's marked Adagio. It's an immediately attractive theme, and Sariel's phrasing only helps it along. Let's hear a bit of this. Yeah, very pretty entry by the flute there at the very end. The piece immediately goes into a B section after about the 1 minute mark and a surprisingly dark shift to minor at 1 minute and 46 seconds. By the way, I want to mention that is a very Mozart sort of sound to that. And this piece, I don't know when it was written, but Kramer lived well beyond Beethoven's death into the Romantic era, so he's a little bit behind the times. Well, unless he wrote it during Mozart's lifetime, which is possible. No, actually, it's not possible because he was born 4 years after Mozart died. Track 3 is the rondo of this work. It's marked Allegro Moderato, and this dancing movement continues on from the previous without a pause. The rondo theme is catchy, as they so often are, and I like the gentle flow it's given by the soloist and orchestra. Let's hear that. Yeah, this really sounds like it could be by Mozart to me. The work continues its gentle dancing style throughout, and at the end we get a nice run by Sariel as well. Tracks 4 to 6 is a work put together by Alon Sariel. He calls it Haydn's Mandolin Concerto in C major. The title was given to this piece by Sariel himself. It's a construction of 3 different pieces, 2 by Haydn and 1 by Ignaz Mazat. The 4th track is the first movement of this sort of Frankenstein monster of a work, Moderato, after Joseph Haydn, Cello Concerto No. 1 in C major, Hoboken 7B, No. 1. This work includes subtle brass in the background, which add a lot of character to the orchestration. This is also played with a light touch and a restrained lilt to the rhythm, I guess to set up and show off the mandolin to greatest effect. Let's hear the mandolin's entry. The mandolin has a light sort of musicality to it, always sounding pleasant, yet it navigates the darker areas of this score reasonably well. Viennese elegance is present throughout the performance. At the end we get a cadenza that sticks mostly to the melody and includes some impressive retards at the end of phrases and some subtle quiet dynamics by the very sensitive Sariel. It's pretty amazing how much the mandolin can express, Let's hear a bit of this cadenza and find out a bit about that. The second movement, track 5, is an adagio after Haydn Violin Concerto in C major, Hoboken 7A, number 1. This uses a short bluegrass cadence improvised by Sariel. A flute has the lead melody in the orchestral part. The mandolin comes in with a tiptoeing entry accentuated by equally tiptoeing pizzicati in the strings. And this is really beautiful. I'm going to sample this part for a bit of a lengthy time. I really enjoyed the light, highly restrained playing in this movement, and I'd urge you to hear all of it for yourself. The cadenza in this movement, bizarrely, and I have to admit entertainingly, switches to a fully felt, he says, bluegrass rhythm. It sounds more jazzy to me, like something out of the 1920s. It's actually pretty funny and quite jarring, I have to say. All right, I'll give you a sample of this. You really need to hear how it comes in, though. You know, after about 3 minutes of what you just heard. Anyway, let's hear it. Fantastic, but I have to ask, what is that doing there?
I think the notes say he studied bluegrass mandolin in California, so...
Yeah, but it seems odd to stick it in a Haydn work. But anyway, it's really technically his work, though, because he's putting it together.
Yeah.
And the third movement of this work, which is track 6, is Rondo Allegretto after Ignaz Malzat, Oboe Concerto in C major, mistakenly attributed to Haydn, and it was originally Hoboken 7G. You got to say these 7 lowercase g and then capital C1. The rondo theme is slowly played and beautifully articulated here. It sounds like melody is being unspooled off of some kind of a roller. Let's hear the opening. The writing in the departure sections is straightforward. This is easily followable as a traditional rondo movement. At 3 minutes and 10 seconds, the music darkens to a minor key, always surprising given the mandolin's presence, but those harmonies register with a bit of sadness rather than heaviness on the mandolin. To me, the mandolin evokes like the southern Italian sunshine. It's just that kind of instrument. It's soon back in high spirits, though, as a more virtuosic take on the theme is taken at its return. Track 7, we're back to a track by Ernst Kremer, another work that he maybe didn't write, Andantino for mandolin and orchestra. The booklet note entirely avoids talking about this. This sounds almost like a Mozart slow movement with the glow it gets in the orchestration. The mandolin playing is delicately attractive, as is the melody of this work. I think we'd be regularly hearing Kremer's works if he wrote melodies as attractive as this. This piece has an ABA form, and I'm going to sample the beginning. Tracks 8 through 13, Ernest Kremer again, theme and variations for mandolin and orchestra. There's a version of this also said to be by Pietro Vimercati with different orchestration, so authorship is hard to pin down. Track 8 is the theme Allegretto, and here it sounds similar to the previous Andantino movement that we heard. Let's hear it. Now we head into the B section of the theme. Variation 1, track 9, brings the piece into a quicker 4/4 time with the melody winding. It proceeds without any structural surprises. Track 10 is variation 2. Here the melody brightens and proceeds in 2 quarter notes followed by a rest. It stays lightly cheerful throughout. Track 11 is variation 3, which presents the theme in triplets. They're attractively played by Sariel, navigating them with a highly appealing tone. Track 12, variation 4, is the brooding minor variation. I haven't sampled any minor keys yet, so let's hear this. It does put across a sadness here. There are some pretty turns in the material as well. Track 13, variation 5. This is the final variation. It's back to a bright, excitable major key, and now there's virtuosity included. and off into the contrasting section of that theme. Sariel articulates each note clearly, as you heard, all of the attacks strongly registering on the recording. Now earlier, when we heard that bluegrass cadenza, we asked, what's that doing here? Well, we have to ask that for this entire next piece, tracks 14 through 16. Giovanni Paisiello, who lived 1741 to 1816, his mandolin concerto in C major. This serves as an antithesis to the rest of the album. It's Neapolitan. The other works are all Viennese. It's not certain that Paisiello composed it, so I guess it does fit in. Track 14, the first movement, Tempo Giusto. This album really should be called, works by composers we're not really sure who they are. I don't know. So this work uses a different type of mandolin from the one we've been hearing. The opening theme is light and cute, and we can hear the mandolin plucking along to the theme. So let's hear this lighter sounding Neapolitan instrument make its solo entry. Got into a little Italian dance there at the end. Yeah, this album is called Vienna Mandolin Stories, and this is most decidedly not a Viennese story. The theme has some virtuosity to it, as you heard, particularly at the end when it reaches its cadence. The movement as a whole is very pretty and gives a carefree feeling, though it's got some light swerves into minor keys at certain points. The isolated sound of the mandolin's cadenza, beginning at 4 minutes and 15 seconds, and the space it leaves is magical. Let's sample that too. And we go back to the theme. Yeah, this first movement of the work, track 14, is worth sampling in full. Seek it out. Track 15, the second movement, is Larghetto alla Siciliana, and this movement clocks in at under 3 minutes and is a pretty straightforward Siciliana rhythm and melody. It is, of course, an appealing melody, but I'll let you sample this one yourself. Keep the record playing after the first movement, in other words. Track 16, the third movement and final movement, Allegro, has a 3/4 rocking back and forth rondo feel to it. I'd like to sample the B section though, the first excursion away from the A section rondo theme, as I liked the extended melody and accompaniment that the mandolin provides in this section. Let's hear that. And that bouncing opening, almost sea shanty of a theme, comes back. This is a simple, enjoyable, attractive movement with, of course, beautiful sound from the mandolin. So basically, this is an album of music credited to composers who may not have composed it. Sariel should have gone for something alluding to that in the title, maybe something like Homage to Anonymous. I've always said Anonymous is the best composer who ever lived, writing in every style imaginable and for around 1,500 years. So I think Anonymous is a vampire. I'm just kidding. We don't know who it is. Joking aside, naming the album after anonymous composers would have at least made the Paesiello, or is it by him, works inclusion understandable. But that's quibbling. This is a beautiful album. Sariel has such a focused tone that he may bring the mandolin back into popularity by himself, so attractive is his playing. He's very entertaining as well, including a bluegrass cadenza in his reconstructed Haydn Mandolin Concerto's second movement. That's really the only bit of overt humor on the album. The rest of it features delicate sounds guaranteed to soften the heart and lift the spirits. It's music to discover. It won't change your world, but it will lighten your days.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Sariel has fine technique and musicality. The Kramer and Paesiello works for mandolin were new to me, if they're by them at all. But they were enjoyable to hear music, regardless of who composed it, that was made in this era specifically for the instrument. And hearing the Mozart flute work on mandolin was interesting because I know that melody well, and it was really interesting to hear it played on the mandolin instead of the flute. I mean, two completely different instruments when it comes to sustaining tones. And Sariel shows a lighter and playful side on the Haydn reconstructed work for violin, cello, and the Mozart oboe movement, and using his bluegrass background for some real fun with that cadenza. I found it all extremely enjoyable and very well played.
All right, now I know there are people listening to the classical section of this podcast thinking, oh, give us some challenging music. Well, coming right up.
There you go.
We've had a lot of music this year by contemporary French composers. We just heard one last week of piano concertos played by Alexandre Tharot, which was really interesting. And earlier in the year, we had that Eric Montalbetti album of his orchestral works. And now we've got an album called Future Horizons, pieces for oboe and violin. It's really for oboe and orchestra for the most part. Francois Leleux is the oboist and really the driving force behind the album. The album also includes Lisa Batiashvili in one work. She's playing the violin. And the Frankfurt Radio Symphony, conducted by Andrés Orozco-Estrada. It was released on the Pentatone label on May 16th. For booklet notes on the works, we only get brief comments from the composers, generally giving an idea of their inspiration behind the work. It's not much, but it seems like it'll be enough. Track 1 is by the composer Nicolas Bacri. He was born in 1961, so a contemporary of me. This is his Notturno for oboe and strings, opus 74, composed in 2001. This features Francois Leleux on the oboe and conducting the work as well. The Frankfurt Radio Symphony is the orchestra. Bacri describes this as both a concerto for oboe and a cantata. It's a first cousin of Bacri's fourth cantata and shares an atmosphere similar to that of English pastoralism inherited from Finzi or Holst. It's a lyrical meditation written between his motets O Lux Beatissima and Beatus Vir. He says it shares the same spiritual climate and the same harmonic preoccupations as those works, based on more or less gradual shifts from the perfect chord to atonal chromaticism. The oboe comes in solo at the beginning with a poignant, lonely sound. Strings then slowly enter and accompany. The harmony in this opening is attractive and touching. It warms up into that pastel string wash with warm bass pinning it down. For me, the oboe's tone is what's giving this piece its character. It's tranquil, but haunting all the way through. Let's hear a sample of this from around the 3rd minute. Now, what you just heard is the most dramatic part of the work. It doesn't start like that. It's more tranquil. The dramatic section is shaped like a dynamic arch. It decrescendos, and we're back to the lonely oboe of the opening. The piece ends on a long sustain, and it's only about 6 minutes long, so it's sort of an opener. Track 2, a composer we've heard before, Michele Jarrell. Born in 1958, he is Swiss. And this work is called Aqua Tainte, Concerto for Oboe and Orchestra, composed in 2016. Jarrell has worked with Leleux in the past. This is a technically difficult piece, as you will hear. It starts with some pretty intriguing and surprising sounds, explosive timpani, and a skittish oboe, falling into a quick staccato line. It's pretty athletic playing from Leleux here. Let's hear the opening. Now, the oboe there gets a really chatty line. And I really liked the way at the beginning that Jarrell kind of used the percussion to kind of launch the next sound out of it as though it were something that were being shot out of a cannon or coming off a trampoline or something. The oboe itself makes some compelling, edgy sounds as it plays. The orchestra, meanwhile, gets into all sorts of interesting timbral combinations, including some metallic percussion crashes. At 3 minutes and 20 seconds, the orchestra falls away and the oboe starts a new line, more sustained and almost melodic. The orchestra slowly comes in and underlines the solo line with steady tones. This section is more tranquil and also includes some edgy, harsher tone from the oboe on occasion. I love the use of timbre in this work, including the various types of tone the oboe can get. A huge orchestral crescendo at around the 6-minute mark leads to a sudden dramatic climax. Let's hear that. Yes, some quarter tones there at the end. And how cool are gongs? Come on, that was huge. I love that sound.
I love gongs, yeah.
Yeah. Some great gigantic gongs there. Really, the kind you'd hear in Asian temples. The oboe gets up high and sustains some pretty long lines. There are fluttering trills in various registers, and the oboe eventually builds up into a more active line, sounding like the sounds of nature. The orchestra echoes this. This is all in the 9th and 10th minutes. In the 11th minute, light percussion sounds come in, and suddenly the oboe takes off on a rapidly chirping line. It sounds rather anxious here. Let's hear a bit of that. and some pretty interesting timbral combinations coming out of the orchestra as well. By 14 minutes and 30 seconds, we seem to be starting the ending section of the piece as the orchestra and oboe calm down and both start playing more sustained tones. In the last minute, a gently chiming percussion chord sounds in fourth notes as the oboe flutters above. This leads the piece to its conclusion, and the work puts the oboe to some pretty intriguing use, I have to say. Tracks 3 to 5 are the final work on the album by Thierry Escaich, double concerto for oboe, violin, and orchestra. And this features Francois Leleux on the oboe and Lisa Batiashvili on violin. This was composed in 2014. Escaich says that for him, writing this piece was first and foremost about bringing together an ideal trio. The third member of the trio is Johann Sebastian Bach. The interplay of multiple counterpoints between the two soloists, the themes from Bach's famous double concerto, distorted, amplified, and layered in a perpetual mirror effect here, are all meant as a tribute to that composer. Track 3 is the first movement Vivace Molto. It starts with a staccato brass blast after a cymbal hit, then low bass. The winds come in chirping at the 30-second mark, then we hear a romantic violin. There's a lot to absorb before the first minute is up. I'm guessing those winds are representative of Bach's presence in their polytonal profile. I want to get Leleux and Batiashvili in the sample together, so let's hear this section from 2 minutes and 30 seconds where they're both playing a manic line together. The oboe gets some pretty cool extended timbral effects in the third and fourth minute with snake charmer modes and some quarter tone dips included. Let's hear a bit of that. Batiashvili's part seems to focus between romantic-era schmaltziness and frantic double-stopped staccato bowing. She does get some cool passages with extended effects like the hollow sul ponticello sound included. The movement ends with a quarter-note repeating chord in the bell-like percussion. This leads into the next movement, track 4, Andante. The oboe comes in its high end here over the percussion that ended the first movement. The theme opening the movement rises into the stratosphere by the first minute, and this seems to be its recurring pattern. And toward the end of that solo, you are of course hearing Lisa Batiashvili on violin. A lightly histrionic section up high subsides into more quarter-note repeating chords, this time played by strings, over which the violin and oboe take turns with solo passages, the oboe coming across pastorally, and the violin sounding more romantic with its vibrato. This descending pattern is thematic, We've heard it since the beginning of the first movement, so descending and ascending are set up as contrasts. The violin makes a move up into the stratosphere and holds a note there at the 5-minute mark, and the oboe plays a sustained line that is bent into quarter tones. The music gets more dramatic as the focus of the orchestral phrasing becomes sharper, and the oboe and violin are engaged in some drama. This is a sample from the 7-minute and 45-second mark. There are always some intriguing timbral combinations to bring us back to earth. This all suddenly slips into a foggier texture, and the ending of the movement builds to the third movement, with the oboe and violin building up drama, only to let it go once the third movement starts. Track 5, Allegro, the third movement, suddenly snaps into a more cheerful mood. Let's hear that. Now, in the right channel here, I think I'm hearing a castanet that's played very briefly. It's kind of an interesting sound to put in there. Quarter note repeating chords are played staccato by the strings as the orchestra and two soloists frolic over it. Textures change fast in the orchestra and keep the movement's flow going with brief interludes. There's sometimes a minimalist sound to it, and the entire movement lightens the mood of the previous two and ends with a build-up to a final tympanum hit. I guess in mood you can say this is a bit like Bach, but I don't know. I thought the writing was a little too 21st century to sound like him. It doesn't, but maybe the mood does. And that's the end of the album. We don't get to hear the oboe as a soloist too often, so this is a welcome release. It consists of two French composers and the Swiss Jarrell, writing in the French timbre-led style. And as a result, we get some more pretty resourceful use of the orchestra's and oboe's timbral possibilities. Nicolas Bacri's Notturno is pretty straightforward, almost English in its pastoral use of the oboe's timbre, and makes for an appealing opening to the program. Michael Jarrell's intriguingly named Aqua Tint, which I guess translates to aqua tint or water tint, is more adventurous, with idea after idea coming before you can absorb what's going on. It repays repeated listenings and has some compelling use of percussion, as well as the solo oboist. Thierry Escaich's double concerto for oboe and violin is a work that starts dramatically and suddenly releases tension in the third movement in a surprising and appealing way. The Jarrell and Escaich works are a bit challenging, but shouldn't put more conservative listeners off. What I love about albums like this is that we hear three works by composers that we otherwise wouldn't get to hear if it weren't for recordings. And of course, I live for recordings, so I love that this happens. I'd like to spend a bit more time with the album and absorb these works a bit more. It's sort of hard to put this across, even though I had 2 weeks to do it this time. I'll be listening more, though. I was intrigued enough to want to do that anyway, so I'll be listening to this again.
It's an interesting program of contemporary works for oboe, and they go together well, while being individually unique and accessible on a first listen, I thought. Last episode, we heard a bassoon recording that broke away from the kind of comic relief stereotype that the instrument is often used for, although it did contain enough humor. Yeah. And with oboe, we often think of the pastoral images that the instrument conjures up in a lot of works that we know it from. And there's some of that here, but a whole lot more, especially in the Jarrell with its technically demanding lines and really stretching the range of the instrument as far as I've heard it played. And it's all engaging. And Leleux has a wonderful tone and admirable technique to pull it all off with flair. And as you say, I think I'll need a few more listens to get to the depths of these works, but they do have a lot of interesting use of the instrument and also striking techniques of orchestral writing as well to jar you with gongs and other kind of percussion and things that are a lot of fun on the way. So I enjoyed this a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot in there too, so it'll repay repeated listenings, and that's what recordings are for. So
yeah, it was good to hear some oboe, yeah.
People couldn't do that in the 18th century unless they played the piano, which I guess they did.
Okay, over on the jazz side, we're going to start out in France. Drummer Paul Morvan's dedicated on the Fresh Sound New Talent label. This came out May 22nd. Now, Paul Morvan is one of the most sought-after drummers on the French straight-ahead jazz scene. After a decade of touring internationally with some of the leading musicians in jazz, including names like the recently departed Jim Rotundi, Dmitri Baevsky, who we'll hear on this recording, Peter Bernstein, Joe Magnarelli, David Wong, and many others. This is his debut recording as a leader. The album notes on Bandcamp are from drumming great Joe Farnsworth, which caught my eye along with the other sidemen here who we've heard before. Farnsworth became Morvan's friend after meeting him in France, and I liked this quote, "And just by the way he looked, I could tell he was serious about the music."
I know what he means.
Hence the title, Dedicated. And you can't get a better endorsement as a drummer than from Joe Farnsworth. So on this recording, Paul Morvan on drums, Dmitri Baevsky on alto sax, and we heard him way back in episode 17 from June of 2021. That was called Bach, Bulgaria, Baevsky, B3, and Big Band.
Boy, I'm glad we shortened those titles.
Yeah, me too. We heard his soundtrack recording. That was also on the Fresh Sound label. On this recording, we've also got Hugo Lippi on guitar on a few tracks, David Wong on bass. We've heard him with Terrell Stafford and Samara Joy. And we've got some flute on a few tracks by Christelle Raculé. This was recorded at Studio Sexton in Malakoff, France on April 21st, 2024. Sound engineer Erwan Boulet. It was produced by Paul Morvan and executive producer Jordi Pujol. We've got a mix of some real jazz classic tunes and a couple originals as well. We're going to get started with Horace Silver's Yeah. And this goes all the way back to 1952 on a recording by the Horace Silver Trio, New Faces, Fresh Sounds on Blue Note. And you may also know it from the Horoscope recording back in 1960, one of my favorites, with trumpeter Blue Mitchell. And a Horace Silver tune without piano? Why not? They started out like the original with the bass ostinato intro. You get a chance to check out Morvan's tom tones before getting into the tune. Baevsky gets some improvisation for 16 measures. This tune is in an ABA, BCAB kind of construction of 8 measure sections. It switches from a Latin beat on the A to swing on the B, and the C section is a bridge with a break. Let's check it out. And Baevsky's off, soloing from there. Very nice drumming, and I like the sound of the drums on this recording. It has a real kind of classic jazz sheen to it. Let's come back to hear some melodic phrase exchanges from Baevsky with Morvan a little bit further on in the tune. To the melody from there. Really exciting drumming, pressurized fills, and a lot of energy to get the recording going. Track 2 is by pianist Cedar Walt and his tune Clockwise. This was recorded a number of times. I believe the first is from Walton with drummer Billy Higgins on his 1979 recording Soweto. And it's also on Walton's 2008 recording Seasoned Wood. A waltzing tune, Morvan gives it a 16-measure intro on the drums. The tune comes in 16-measure sections with a mysterious minor alternation of chords in the first and last sections, and a sweeter repeating melody in the middle. Let's hear it. Section once more from there. Let's come back in and hear some of Baevsky's solo on this tune. David Wong is mapping out the harmonic direction nicely on the bass under everything in this chordless format, and he has his own bass solo as well on this tune. Track 3 is pianist Duke Pearson's Say You're Mine. This is from 1961's Bags Groove recording. Bring in Hugo Lippi on guitar and Christelle Raquelet on flute for a change of scenery here. The tune has a slinky minor melody in a 32-measure AABA shape. Wong and Lippi set up a nice loping groove with an ostinato idea on the introduction, and Raquelet and Baevsky work the melody softly in unison. final A section from there. Bajewski solos first with accented swinging licks. Let's check out the start of Lippi's solo on this one. Nicely mixing in chords in his lines with a really warm tone and rich reverb on there as well. They reset with the ostinato after the guitar solo and take it through the melody once more and end it with a fading ostinato. Track 4 is Paul Morvan's original composition, One for Kochte. This one is a 12-bar blues in F, but it's got some syncopated rhythmic and harmonic surprises. Morvan gets a subdivided cymbal groove going, and Lippi stays on here, adding some ideas on the 8-measure intro before working a couple rounds of the melody with Bajewski. Let's hear it. Bajewski's off on a solo first, followed by Lippi. They switch it up to a loping swing beat under the guitar solo. Let's check out David Wong's bass solo on this tune. Great melodic bluesy ideas and a strong sense of pitch on his bass playing, and it's back to the melody from there to wrap it up. Bebop time with track number 5, Charlie Parker's Coco, that he recorded way back in 1945. Back to the chordless trio format for this one with Charlie Parker's Cherokee chord-based tune. Bajewski really bebops it out at high speed, and Morvan has some great reactions and interaction with his ideas. Let's just hear this one get started. really moving along. Morvan takes a solo on this one too, and it all wraps up in less than 3 minutes. Track 6 is another Morvan original, Kneelin' in the Yard. Batiashvili sits out on this one, and Lippi is back in, leaving a guitar trio formation, and Lippi gives it a rubato solo intro, and then sets the ballad tempo to bring in bass and drums on the 28-measure melody. I like that little harmonic surprise there in the 17th measure. Wang solos first, and then Lippi. Morvan shows off delicate brush textures and nice cymbal sounds throughout. I like how it gets a push with more intense chords and lines at the end from Lippi with cool drum fills. Let's check out some of the ending. Track 7 is a tune by the great trumpeter Thad Jones, Let's. You can find this on the magnificent Thad Jones Volume 3 from 1965. This is a fun tune with building syncopated suspense. Lippi is out and Recollet is back on flute to work the melody with Batiashvili, and check out the tight bass and drum work underneath. Batiashvili's off soloing there first, and Recollet gets a short flute solo on this one, so let's check that out. And Wong walks it out on the bass from there into some trading eights from flute and sax with Morvan before once more through the melody. Another Charlie Parker tune for track 8, Passport. This was released in 1949, a rhythm changes bass tune. Wong works the melody in unison on bass with Bajewski, switching up to walking for a bit on the B section. Morvan has the brushes going and continues on into a brush solo. Bajewski's back with the solo from there, and Wong takes a bouncy bass solo on this one too. Track 9, Old Folks, a tune by Willard Robinson going all the way back to 1938, and it was sung in the same year by Bing Crosby. Lippy is back in for this old tune. It's a 32-measure AABA melody. They take it at a very relaxed tempo that gives Bajewski lots of space for breathy embellishments on the way. Let's hear it get started. And let's hear a little bit of Lippy's guitar solo on this one as well. Arc to the solo development there. Bajewski's back for improvisations with Wong and Morvan injecting a good skip into the groove. He connects it back to the final section of the melody and a pretty gentle ending. And the recording ends up with a tune by Harold Arlen, Asleep in B, from the 1954 Broadway musical House of Flowers, based on Truman Capote's short story, and Capote wrote the lyrics for this tune. It's a happy 34-measure melody. Morvan gives it a tasteful drum intro before Bacri is off over Wong's buoyant bass. Let's check it out. Wong's up first for a bass solo from there. Let's come back in for one more solo from Bacri on this final tune. Morvan's really swinging things along, and they take it out with one more time through the melody. And that's the recording, a program of classic jazz material with tunes from Charlie Parker, Horace Silver, Cedar Walton, and Thad Jones, a couple old standards, and Morvan's two tunes rounded out nicely with a blues and a ballad. Morvan really swings, and he's a subtle rather than bombastic drummer, always paying attention to the tone and textures on his drums and cymbals. He listens and reacts to what everyone is playing, and his tight interplay with Wong is enjoyable throughout. Wong's bass lines are solid, and his solos have great melodic directions. Bacri shows off his bebop chops throughout, and his sound has a lot of different shades, from edgy to soft and breathy, and he sculpts it to match each tune's mood. Fine tone in playing from Hugo Lippi, adding some guitar to break up the chordless part of the program, and his solos are enjoyable too. And Christelle Raquel's flute brings variety on a couple tunes with a fun solo as well. The program and Morvan's playing are timeless really, and would be great music and drumming in any jazz era.
I seem to always like drum-led albums. Despite all the activity, this album comes across as rather quiet, or maybe even more accurately, there's a stillness to it without its being tranquil. It moves with energy without actually moving. It's kind of a sort of contrasting effect. The entire effect is interesting to me. All of the performances are clean and mild-mannered, and when things get aggressive in rhythm, they remain on the quiet side and dynamic. I really liked this, but it's hard to pin down in words what I heard. I liked Dmitry Bacri's breathy approach to his instrument, and I thought Paul Morvan on drums was as self-effacing as a band leader can be, playing often with brushes and creating a light, intimate atmosphere. There are a lot of tracks on this album, yet it all goes by pretty fast, and it's thoroughly enjoyable. And like you said, it's kind of like got an old-school sound to it, too. Yeah,
I can see why Joe Farnsworth would like his playing, and I really like not only his technique and carefulness of tone, but the whole way this album sounds. The drums just sort of blend in with each other and the rest of the music well.
Yeah, drum-led bands, they're just the best.
All right, next album, let's go over to Italy on Red Records. Italian saxophonist Michele Polga and his new recording Doors. It came out May 23rd. Michele Polga is a saxophonist and composer. He graduated in saxophone at the Bologna Conservatory and in jazz music at the Trento Conservatory. Over his career, he's played with many important musicians, including Fabrizio Bosso, Paolo Fresu, Franco De Andrea, Carla Bley, Dick Oates, Spike Wilner, Dee Dee Bridgewater, and many others. He has 2 recordings with Fabrizio Bosso, one live and one studio from 2011 and 2013, so be sure to check those out as well. And we heard him back in episode 193, Organ Spirit with Come On Irma Records. That's by Giulio Campagnolo and the Jazz Funkers, an album we really enjoyed as well. On this recording, Michele Polga on tenor sax, Alessandro Lanzoni on piano, Gabriele Evangelista on double bass, and Bernardo Guerra on drums. All tunes here composed by Michele Polga except track 7. I'll mention that when we get there. Recorded by Diego Piotto at Art Music Studio, Bassano del Grappa in Italy on May 18th, 2024. Mixed and mastered by Michele Polga himself, executive producer Marco Panissi. Recording gets underway with Polga original Back and Forth. This tune slams right in over the charging bass of Evangelista. The 40-measure sax melody keeps evolving with nice rhythmic change-ups and fills from Guerra and a little piano interlude from Lanzoni. Polga continues on with a solo. Let's check it out. It's an exciting start, and I say we just continue on and hear some more of his solo. What stands out right away is Polga's phrasing and connecting lines of ideas even over the changing rhythms below. Lanzoni follows the piano solo that makes good use of space and works into a forceful chord vamp where Guerra lets loose with some drum artillery before Polga's back with the final run through the melody with a sudden soft ending. A lot of good energy to start the recording out. Track 2, Doors, the title track. It's got a relaxed Latin beat with light brush textures from Guerra. The sax melody phrases have a reticent quality, kind of hesitation that's charming. It's in an AABA form with a longer 12-measure B section and some spots for Evangelista's fat bass sound to stand out. bass section of the melody from there. On this one, let's check out some of Lanzoni's piano solo. I like how he trickles it out from the start and then adds flowing lines around dissonant chords. Polga's solo is relaxed and smooth, getting a little more intensity for a climax that goes from low to high register before pulling back to connect to the melody again. There's a lot of mature subtlety in this one. Track 3, Sunday Afternoon. The melody phrasing in this tune has a kind of rocking back and forth feel over alternating chords in the first two 8-measure sections, and then the next longer 20-measure section gets a more forward momentum before bringing back the original idea. The bass percolates and mixes with a clicky drum groove from Guerra. Let's hear it into the start of Polga's solo. Lanzoni has a piano solo on this one too, and after getting back to the melody, the ending has some fun rhythmic interplay and Guerra works out some exciting fills. Let's hear it wrap up. Track 4, Late Winter, a slow ballad. The melody takes about 2 minutes to work through. The first and last sections are the same, and I like how there's an extra measure after the first 8-measure section that sort of lets it breathe before moving on, and there are a lot of nice chord changes on the way. Let's hear it get started. Evangelista has a bass solo on this one, so let's hear some of his playing. Nice tone way up high on the bass. Polga takes a short solo to the final melody section that has a coda ending with some piano decoration from Lanzoni. Track 5 is Unsaid. This tune is a lot of fun rhythmically. There's a 12-measure intro with a cool bass ostinato figure. In the final 4 measures, the syncopated change-ups foreshadow what happens at the end of the 32-measure sax melody. The change-ups in the bass underneath from snappy figures to walking catch your ear. Goes off on a solo from there. Let's come back in and hear some more. Again, nice building on ideas as he goes along in his solo. Lanzoni follows with the piano solo before a final melody section. Track 6, I'm not sure how to read this one. Baxocece?
I don't know, it's probably some dialect from Sardinia or something. I'm not really sure. Baxokeke, I guess.
Keke?
Yeah, I guess.
Guerra gives it a unique 4-measure drum beat intro. The somewhat forlorn sax melody contrasts with the solid straight drum beat. There are 3 8-measure sections, but a 3-measure interlude after the first section before the sax gets going again. Let's hear it get started. The rhythmic push dissolves into a freer feeling for the start of Lanzoni's piano solo. Let's hear some of his playing on this one. Polga is next, and his solo on this one works to some edgy tone for emphasis and spots. Track 7, the only non-Polga original, Along Came Betty, a tune by Benny Golson. This is from the 1958 album Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, also called Monin sometimes, although that title doesn't appear on the cover of the album. A duet for Polga and Lanzoni here, and Lanzoni brings both a nice bounce and interesting chord voicings to this tune. Sounds like they're having a lot of fun together on this one, and Lanzoni gets to break away on his own for a solo too. Track 8 is Retrain, Trane, a spiritual jazz period Coltrane-esque tune. This goes through a lot of transitions, so it's hard to give you a picture from samples. It starts with about a minute of drumming from Guerra, working into free rolling piano and bass for rubato sax lines to emerge from. Let's pick it up about a minute in where the piano and bass have joined in. Ambling 7-beat groove eventually emerges with a new sax melody, and then we get a chance to hear a polga on something more modally and free, so let's hear some of his improvisations that follow. Lanzoni has a solo from there before Polga returns for a final section. And the recording ends up with one more Polga original after a while. And we end things up with a waltz. It's light and breezy. It kicks off interestingly with a little rolling piano chord from the second beat. The melody structure is an A-B-C-A pattern with a 6-measure C part. The Evangelista is up first for a bass solo on this one. Let's hear the tune get going. Let's hear one more Polga solo for our final sample on this recording. Follows from there before a final melody section and a gentle ending. A program of fresh-sounding original compositions plus a duet version of a Benny Golson tune done in a stylish way. Polga's compositions are melodically easy to enjoy on a first listen, but have plenty of unique structural features and harmonic twists to keep you coming back listening again. His tenor sax tone is polished and full, but he can get an edge for emphasis when he wants it. The way he structures solos is very fine, building on previous ideas and creating a sense of inevitability. Lanzoni's piano solos are interesting throughout, surprising you by going in unexpected directions, and Guerra and Evangelista round out a great rhythm section with solo spots for each to stand out. All of the tunes have unique grooves, resulting in a lot of variety, and things transform on the way in fun ways in a lot of tunes too. Overall, the playing comes off sounding effortless and uplifting, which is what we usually experience in the Italian jazz recordings we hear, and this album goes in the excellent category as well for me.
Yeah, whenever they pick the happiest country in the world, it's never Italy, and I can't see why, because from their music, the way they make music is always kind of cheerful. I don't know. They seem like pretty happy people to me. This album has some adventurous playing on it within traditional forms. Michele Polga is lyrical and can be athletic at times. He often plays with a powerful tone, even in slower rhythms, but he can soften it when he wants to. As a soloist, he generates appealing ideas on the spot, and it was a pleasure to hear. Alessandro Lanzoni on this album is a disruptor, always playing against the rhythm in his solos, and bringing in some jagged harmonies as well. He does smooth out at times, but overall he wants to break things up and issue a challenge. He plays with some thunderous left-hand chords, too. We do get some solos from Gabriele Evangelista on bass and Bernardo Guerra on drums, who gets a quick, crisp snap on his snare drum sound that I really liked. I kind of like when the drums come up sounding like that. But the album belongs to Polga and Lanzoni. All four musicians have a unique sound and approach to soloing, and it's well worth a listen.
Definitely always worth checking out Italian jazz. We'll get some more recordings on in the near future as well. Over to the U.S. for our final recording on the Posi-Tone label. Vibraphonist Ben Gillece's new recording Pivot Point came out May 23rd. Originally from New Jersey, Gillece started playing vibes as a teenager. He moved on to Philadelphia, and he's now based in New York. His style was influenced by Milt Jackson and Bobby Hutcherson. Back in episode 23, Something Old, Something New, clarinet and piano, jazz vocals too, a title that was much too long. We heard him first on Art Hirohara's Open Sky, and then in episode 163, Theater of Music from May of last year, we heard his previous release, Stick Together. That had Art Hirohara, Boris Kozlov, and Rudy Royston on it. And we recently heard him on trombonist Alton Senkolar's new recording. This time the lineup is Ben Gillece on vibraphone, Willie Morris on tenor and soprano saxophone, John Davis on piano, Boris Kozlov on bass, and two drummers split the duties here, Rudy Royston's on tracks 1, 2, 3, and 7, and Jason Tiemann on 4, 5, 6, and 8. As always, the Posi-Tone recording team, Mark Free, the producer, Nico Toole, the engineer. This was recorded May 19th, 2023 at Acoustic Recording, Brooklyn, New York. Mixed and mastered at Woodland Studios, Lake Oswego, Oregon. The previous release was recorded in February of 2023, so these are later sessions from the same year. And the recording gets underway with a Gillece original Haymaker. This is an interesting tune that makes the most of the instrumentation. Morris's tenor takes the melody lead with Gillece's vibes. Davis's piano has little fills out of the way of the vibes, and there are some cool bass triplet figures that get mixed in. It's 48 measures overall, including a break into Morris's sax solo. You'll hear the first phrase come back around after 20 measures. Morris sounds enthusiastic, as we've come to expect from his playing. Let's come back in on this one to hear some of Gillece's solo. Exciting ideas and some rapid-fire intervals. Nice fills from Royston underneath. You always know his drum sound. Davis is getting started there with waves of piano. They work into tricky rhythmic figures, and Gillece lays out to give him harmonic space. They take it once more through the melody to finish it up. Track 2 is a tune by Willie Morris, What's Expected. It's a playful, swinging 12-bar blues. Morris and Gillece started out alone on the melody. Bass and drums join in for another round. Kozlov lays down thick walking bass for Morris to get going on a solo. Let's hear this one. Morris pushes it more and more over a lot of choruses. Let's come back in to hear some more of his playing on his own tune. Gillece and Davis also get solos with lots of time to build up ideas, and Davis is particularly playful on this one. A couple final rounds of the blues wraps it up. Track 3 is a Ben Gillece original, Beyond the Veil, a pretty ballad with hypnotic ringing vibes chords to set the mood on an 8-measure intro. Kozlov adds bass on the way. There's a repeating 14-measure sax melody with Morris on soprano sax here. At this slow tempo, we can get through the first time. And it goes around again from there. There's an 8-measure contrasting interlude section with a vibes melody line before the opening figure returns for the start of a solo from Morris. Let's hear some subtle vibe work from Gillece here into piano from John Davis. And Morris is back for one time through the sax melody, and then the vibes interlude section and slowed opening figure take it out. Track 4, another Gillece original, Stranded in Elizabeth. Jason Tiemann is in on drums for this one with a fun Latin beat. There's an 8-measure intro with a cool bass and left-hand piano line that Gillece puts some vibes over. The melody is a 40-measure evolving sax and vibes construction, with Gillece and Morris trading off sections for adding fills at the start. We won't get through all of it, but let's hear it get started. Gillece solos first on this one, then Morris. Let's hear some more of Davis's playing on this tune. And they get back to the melody from there with pretty ringing vibes at the end. Track 5 is a Herbie Hancock tune, Toys, from his 1968 Blue Note album Speak Like a Child. We heard Czech pianist Emil Viklitsky play a version of this not too long ago. It's a repeating 16-measure melody taken by Morris and Gillece. I like Davis's backing chords and fills, and the rising and falling line at the end of the melody is always fun. Gillece, Morris, and Davis all get solos on this one. Let's hear some of Morris's playing on this tune. At the end of this one, they have some fun with repeats of the rising and falling line from the melody to end it. Track 6, a John Davis tune just for fun. This is a swinging AABA 32-measure melody. Morris takes the A sections and Gillece the B, and Morris is up for the first solo. Let's hear it get going. Gillece and Davis both follow with solos, and then Kozlov and Tiemann do some trading. Let's hear some of that. And back to the melody from there to take it out. Track 7 is another John Davis tune, changes over time. Kozlov lays down a cool ostinato bass line on the 8-measure intro, and you'll feel that we're in 5/4 time here. Royston is back on the drums for this one. The Saxon Vibes melody is a fun and jagged 12-bar blues construction with nice fills from Davis. Gillece is off soloing first there, followed by Morris and Davis. Royston gets to have some fun on this one too, so let's check that out. Final rounds of the blues with some repeating last lines and vamping with vibes and piano play to take it out. And the recording ends up with the title track, a Gillece original Pivot Point. Tiemann is back on the drums for this one, and Morris back on soprano sax. It feels like it's in a 6/8 time signature, starting out with a 4-measure alternating vibe chord intro. Morris gets the 28-measure melody going over the vibes, and the others join in. There's a little piano section before it builds rhythmic tension at the end of the melody into the start of Morris's sax solo. Now let's hear one more from Gillece on this final tune. And Davis gets the last solo before they get back to the melody. They extend it with a tension-building ostinato from Kozlov and some vamping on the final phrase to end up the tune and the recording. An enjoyable program of originals from Gillece, Davis, and one from Willie Morris, plus a Herbie Hancock tune. There's a variety of grooves and meters with a mix of swinging melodies and straight beat feels, ballads and blues as well. Gillece is a well-rounded vibes player who can impress you with speedy mallet work while always keeping melodic direction. He's also good with the lush side of the vibes charm, making dreamy, ringing chord atmospheres in spots. Vibes and piano can get in each other's tonal space sometimes, but Gillece and Davis have a nice separation of duties and parts through the recording, and Davis's solos are always interestingly creative. Willie Morris shares the melody leads, his solos sound inspired, and he takes some adventurous harmonic excursions in his improvisations. Kozlov is solid and grooving as usual over any style or meter, and both Tiemann and Royston have great grooves and fills, never overpowering the mix of other instruments. A bunch of familiar musicians to us who bring out the best in each other, and this recording is no exception.
Yeah, there's a variety of styles on the album. Track tempos range from upbeat to ballad, and we even get a New Orleans rhythm and changes over time on the drums. Willie Morris switches between tenor and soprano sax as well, getting a different character out of both instruments. I like his smooth legato when he decides to employ it. Ben Gillece has a great sound on the vibes and a consummate ability to groove when the music is swinging. He solos in a variety of styles, showing melodic ideas, virtuosity and figuration. He has repeated notes and rapid scale arpeggio patterns at times, and he leaves space sometimes so we can absorb his fantastic tone. It's a hard album to sum up musically, except to say that there's a lot to like, and everyone is on point in their playing.
As always, another great release from Posi-Tone. And that's going to wrap it up for episode 215. Back after an interview episode. As always, we want to thank Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo. And we've got some stuff lined up for episode 216 next week already. What's on the classical menu for next time, Mike?
Yeah, all ready to go with a composer that was unfamiliar to me until last year, Silvius Leopold Weiss. And this is an album called Fireworks for Lute, performed by Bernhard Hofstadter on the lute on the Christophorus label. And I got to know this composer's name from an album on the Arcana label last year by Evangelina Mascardi, which was called Selected Works for Lute, and I wanted to hear more. We never got to talk about it because that was a double album, and this one isn't, so we get to talk about him now. We get to hear a new recording of Hector Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique, a very famous work. This is by the conductor Klaus Mäkelä, conducting the Orchestre de Paris, and we've talked about him before. It's been a while since we've talked about him on this podcast, so I'm kind of curious about what he's doing, and I sort of want to hear the Symphonie Fantastique again. It's been a while. And then, in the contemporary category, although it's not all contemporary, is an album called L'Accordéoniste by Félicien Brut on the accordion. This one is dedicated to my brother Rich, who really loves the accordion. He complains about it to me often, but he's going to get an earful of the accordion next week in a variety of works, I have to say. I'm looking forward to hearing this.
How can an Italian-American not like accordion?
It doesn't make sense to me either.
All right, over on the jazz side, we're going to start out, speaking of Italian things, with Tony's Dream. Do you know what Tony that would be?
Well, I know because you told me, but I was really surprised. Why don't you spring it on everybody?
Antonio Vivaldi.
Yeah,
this is a jazz take on his music by the Mellodrum Trio, and this is on Ajuropa Records, a more straight-ahead kind of jazz release. I'm pretty excited about that.
I just can't think of a guy in a white powdered wig being called Tony for some reason. I don't know.
And then we're going to do a recording coming from Sweden. Håkan Traeger got in touch with me before and said, hey, why don't you talk about my recording? And I said, okay, what is it? And it had already been out for a while. And I said, well, next time you have a new recording out, let us know. And, well, he did. And this is by the Coco Chatru Quartet called Limbocolia. And interesting instrumentation, 2 saxes, drums, and bass. And sometimes we've got some vibes in there. So largely chordless. And we won't be able to pronounce any of the song titles because they're all in Swedish. So this is going to be fun. And we'll wrap it up with a recording from Josh Nelson and Kevin Vanden Elzen called West Coast Echoes, a project they've got focusing on some great West Coast jazz sounds. So that'll be the program for jazz. And if you want to get started listening to all these new classical and jazz releases, we'll have a playlist up on Deezer a few hours after this episode is published, and we'll have a link to it on our Facebook page as well. Any final thoughts for this episode, Mike?
Well, you mentioned earlier that I was single, but I just want to say, years ago, I was doing salsa dance, and my life was like the beginning of the Beatles movie, A Hard Day's Night. I had all these girls chasing me everywhere. Now I do a podcast, no one's interested. Why is that? What is it about a podcast? Do I have to start dancing again? I can't.
Ladies, adult music podcast, all one word at gmail.com. Help Mike out here. Come on.
Yeah.
We're not getting any younger.
Send pictures.
And I can't wait for Richard to hear the accordion recording for next week.
I can't wait. I'm looking forward to that myself. I'm going to have to get started on it right away, I think.
A lot to look forward to for next week. So, as always, keep listening, and we'll see you again here on episode 216 next time.